Namaskar, I'm Karishma Himatsinghani for Infinity Foundation. Today I am presenting to you a very interesting chat with two gentlemen from the Caribbean, Guyana to be precise. You may not even have heard the name of this small country in South America, which has significant numbers of Hindus living there. These Hindus are those who migrated there as indentured laborers about 2 centuries ago and have practically built the country, and they make the largest minority in the country today. Guyana has been in focus recently due to huge oil discoveries it has made. Thus, this region has become very important, and it makes sense that the Indian government should take a special interest in this region. However, the sad truth is that they have not. Hindus, who are the largest minority and builders of the country, are facing major human rights issues, but there has been very little or no interest in their plight from the international community, who otherwise are very vocal about the religious freedom and human rights when it comes to Christian community. It perhaps understandable that the larger international community has just ignored the woes of Guyanese Hindus, since Hindus don't count for them at all. The lack of support from the Indian government is the unkindest cut of all, considering they are the natural ally of Hindus of Guyana culturally and by religion. And the current Indian government by far has been the most uncaring one, though there has been general neglect from the previous governments too. To top it all, sadly, the NRI community worldwide has not shown much interest in their plight too. Through this chat with these two gentlemen, one thing comes out very clearly, and that is that Guyana could be a great geopolitical interest for the Indian government, and also that Indian support to the Hindu community living there could be a great booster for the community in their fight against human rights abuse that they are facing. Let's enjoy the interview. And our first guest is Dr. Kirk Meighoo. He is a former senator from Trinidad and Tobago, former university lecturer and political and cultural activist. He has conducted a national survey in Guyana during the recent political crisis and interviewed leading political and civic figures on all sides of the conflict. And our second guest is Dr. Vishnu Bisram. Dr. Vishnu Bisram was born in Guyana and received his tertiary education in USA. He has multiple doctorates in history, political science, sociology, and economics. He is a columnist for a weekly newspaper and contributes regularly in the media in Guyana and also in India. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Meighoo and Dr. Bisram. Thank you so much for your precious time.
Oh, thank you. Namaste, Karishma ji.
Namaskar. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And let me begin asking to you, Dr. Vishnu Bisram, since you are from Guyana, what exactly is happening there politically? What is the crisis?
Indians have been coming to Guyana, came to Guyana as indentured laborers, or girmits or girmitias as they are known in India, since 1838. So the presence of Indians in Guyana has been about 182 years. And in addition to Guyana, there are other parts of the Caribbean, Southern Caribbean in particular. The three places that had a very large concentration of Indians are in Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Suriname. And in Guyana in particular, we have a political situation where politics is shaped by race. And the two largest ethnic groups are East Indians, who make up almost half of the population. The African population makes up just over a third, and other ethnic groups that contribute to the less. So we have a political impasse or a crisis, as you correctly stated. After elections were held on March 2nd, there is no declaration of the final outcome of the elections. We still don't know officially which political party won. Unofficially, we know which party won, but the defeated party, the loser, has refused to accept the outcome. And so the matter has been ongoing and has become a stalemate.
Basically, yeah, the political impasse that's going on right now is that this party, who was in government, was in, and we'll discuss this later on, they actually ruled in a sort of racial ethnic dictatorship that the US supported, and Britain, against the Indian-led party, and we can talk about that. But that is the historical background to this. So it's not only that this party is refusing to relinquish power when it should have been doing so since December 2018. Although the elections, the result from March 2nd, has been drawn out. Really, this goes back to December 2018 when they should have been out of power. But they've been trying by hook or by crook to stay in, just as was happening in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And the world did nothing. The world let it happen. The world turned a blind eye, and the Guyanese people were so oppressed, and the world did not care.
Guyana first had its first adult franchise election in 1953, and the political party that was formed was led by a person of Indian descent, Dr. Chetty Jagan, who went on to win a landslide victory. The government was short-lived because the British government toppled it and went back to colonial rule. Self-rule was restored in 1957. In the intervening period, Dr. Jagan went to several places. One of those locations was in India to seek the help of then Prime Minister Nehru, who provided some support for the restoration of democratic rule in Guyana in 1957. And in elections held in 57, Dr. Jagan won again a landslide, as he also did re-elected in 1961, but was removed from office through an engineered coup that was carried out by the United States and Britain. And so from December 1964, when Dr. Jagan was removed from office, to 1992, there was what was referred to as an ethnic dictatorship, a racial dictatorship. So in Guyana, you have two main political parties. One, the People's Progressive Party, PPP, and the People's National Congress, PNC. The PPP is basically an Indian party, and the PNC is essentially an African party. So the African party was able to capture power and establish a dictatorship from 1965 through 1992. International pressure led to the restoration of democratic governance in 1992, and Dr. Jagan won election. Regrettably, he died in office after 4.5 years in 1997, and his party continued in government, winning election and re-election until 2015, when it was defeated at the polls. So in December of 2018, there was a no confidence motion against the government. The government lost the motion, but refused to leave office until they were pressured by various forces, and elections were finally held some 15 months later, after the no confidence motion, in March 2nd, 2020 of this year. And so now we are in this crisis where the government has refused to allow the official declaration of elections in order for there to be a transition into democracy and a new government.
Dr. Vishnu, since you grew up in Guyana and you just mentioned that Indian ethnic group makes the majority in almost like half the population is Indian ethnic group there. And you have seen so much of turmoil happening there, political and everything, and Indian ethnic group suffering politically and socially as well. Are you happy with the Indian government support to the group in Guyana, or do you think they could do more?
I'm not pleased at all with the Indian government response, especially to this current crisis. In fact, the Indian government has been very silent, except for a 3-sentence response about a month after the election. It really did not say anything at all. I think this goes back to then Prime Minister Nehru, who told the Indian population after India became independence in 1947, that to fend for themselves. And basically Indians in Guyana and in other parts of the Caribbean as well have been fending for themselves. India really has not provided much political support. Yes, there has been a lot of cultural exchange, and there have been a lot of scholarships being given to Indians in the Southern Caribbean to study in India, to maintain cultural links and so forth. But politically, India has not been very supportive at all. Had India taken a more active or activist approach to what has been going on or what went on in Guyana during the 28 years dictatorship and what took place from December of 2018 to now, many of these problems would have been avoided. One should note that India was very, very active in the struggle against apartheid rule in South Africa, as well as the racist rule in what was then Rhodesia. So there is no reason why India can say that's the internal affairs of those countries when you already had a precedent of making statements and intervening in the affairs of Rhodesia and South Africa.
Dr. Kirk, would you like to add something on it?
The party that led us to independence was led by an Afro-Trinidadian of African descent. And he actually had more affinity to Nehru. And he considered but his party did have a lot of Christian Indians and Muslim Indians, but the bulk of the Hindu Indians were in another party, the opposition party. And Eric Williams, who was our first prime minister, had a lot of affinity to Nehru. I don't think he ever had in-depth conversations with him, but there were connections with the Indian National Congress. And he would chastise the local Indians here as being like the backward Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha in India, as opposed to the progressive socialist policies of Nehru. And so he chastised the Indians here that were with the opposition and not following him as a hostile and recalcitrant minority. And Indians here, particularly the Hindus, were very fearful that this new government would not take into account minority rights, would wipe out their cultural heritage that they had built, for a century before, and more, in fact, and that they would seek to erase their presence. And this concern is still real, and it's still here, but we have kept it in an amazing way for almost 200 years. Now, when Indians, not only in the West Indies, but also in Kenya, in Malaysia, in South Africa, in other colonies where Fiji, where Indians were sent out, representations were made to the Indian government saying, as the British leave, it's interesting because maybe in India, where the British were seen as oppressors, in many times in these colonies, the Indians here saw the British as guaranteeing their protection from a majority rule of mainly Africans who had a lot of resentment against British rule and sort of resented the Indian presence because it didn't make the place fully African,
basically.
So we were a kind of complication to the African liberation narrative, right? So so now Nehru being bombarded, I suppose, with these requests from Indian communities all over the world, made a statement in the parliament on it, on the Indian parliament. He made an official statement to the parliament that the Indian government had nothing to do with these overseas Indian populations. You need to be good citizens of the country you're in. Now, we can accept that, of course, we need to be good citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, good citizens of Guyana, etc. And we are, right? But we aren't guests here, right? That's something that has to be understood. We built these countries. That's different from when you're going into countries that were already built. These were new, fresh colonies where we were foundational people. And that sense of abandonment that Indians felt by the Indian government, it was very, very, very hurtful to the Indian community because the Indian community followed and supported the whole Indian nationalist struggle. Gandhi's struggle was sparked by his in South Africa and the indentured there. That's where he started, in the diaspora, and then he went to India and started Satyagraha and so forth there. But it was with the Indian population outside.
Is the scenario different? Any different now? Has it improved? What is going on right now?
I happen to have had a lot of interaction with then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was very fond of girmits. And we met him several times in New York when he would come annually for his visit to the United Nations. He was quite impressed, and he opened up a lot of benefits for us. In fact, it was a suggestion of ours before he became Prime Minister that there should be an annual parley of Indians in the diaspora, and this eventually became the PBD. In 2003, which I attended along with many other people annually over the next period of time. So Atal Bihari was quite close with the Indian diaspora in these so-called underdeveloped countries. Subsequently, relationships improved somewhat with the Congress when MOIA was established. For whatever reason, MOIA was dissolved when Prime Minister Modi came into office, and there is now a Secretary of Overseas Indian Affairs. So we were disappointed, so that in that there isn't direct communication with the Indian diaspora. You see, in New York, there was an office, an Overseas Indian Affairs Embassy, which we used to visit very often. That was abolished, and we were hoping something like this could be recreated. We are also hoping that Prime Minister Modi would have spent more time focusing on the Gilmit diaspora, for lack of a better term. But we are all part of the Indian diaspora, and we felt that more attention has been focused on the recent Indian diaspora that settled in the U.S. and Europe, Australia, and so forth, since the 1960s. But there is so much benefit to be obtained from the Gilmit diaspora, because these societies of Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname, and other islands have so much, and they're so wealthy of natural resources that could be quite beneficial to India, especially that Guyana has discovered one of the largest deposits of oil and natural gas, and Guyana is set to boom. In fact, had it not been for this COVID issue, oil would be flowing out of Guyana over the next couple of years of up to 1.5 million barrels per day.
You both have surveyed Guyana, and while we were discussing, you just now, you mentioned, Dr. Vishnu, that how difficult it was. It was a struggle to get a free and fair election finally coming to Guyana. And it started happening, and then now we see another political turmoil. How, since you both have surveyed on the ground and you know the ground situation, how do you see this political situation evolve? How do you see what could be the solution as per your survey and your analysis that the situation could be improved, and the free and fair election come back to Guyana?
Right. So since I'm familiar with the struggle, this was a very, very difficult, long struggle to have the restoration of democracy in Guyana. And I could tell you, during that period of dictatorship, so many Guyanese left. Today, there are more Guyanese outside of Guyana than in Guyana. There are more Indo-Guyanese living in the United States than there are Indo-Guyanese within Guyana. And besides the US, there are Indo-Guyanese in Canada, in Europe, in all the islands of the Caribbean. Even in Trinidad, there were over 10,000 Indo-Guyanese that settled in Trinidad. Tens of thousands settled in Suriname, in French Guyana, in Brazil, and in Venezuela. So one of the things that drove people to migrate was not just the dictatorship, but the oppressive conditions. Not many people in India are familiar that in Guyana, there was the banning of imports of basic food items. For example, potato was banned, garlic was banned, onion was banned, ginger was banned, flour was banned, ghee was banned, agarbatti was banned, and all the items that you needed for the typical Indian diet. Dal, split peas was banned. Chana was banned.
We used to have to smuggle dal and chana to Guyana.
So that was by design, basically.
I used to go to Trinidad, purchase and take it back for family members so that they could make roti. How could you make roti if you have no flour? And how could you make prasad, or what we refer to as mohan bhog, in a country if you don't have flour. That's a basic staple for it. And ghee is a basic item. So we had to make do with all kinds of sufferings and limitations and scarcity. So where do we stand today? We don't want to return to that kind of government. So right now, the only issue for us is there was an election. And when you have an election and it's free and fair, and the international observers who were there on March 2nd said the election was free and fair, but the counting of the ballots went haywire, and the counting is where there was fraud. And so we have to write the counting of the process.
Essentially, there is fraud here. The clear winner is the so-called opposition, because they should be governing, the PPP party. They should be, and what is happening is that they're trying by hook and crook to not let them in. But I want to put this in a larger perspective, and if we want to say how this can be solved, I mean, the outside world has to put in pressure. Now, our call for Indian citizens, for the Indian government to intervene, is not on a racial basis, on an ethnic basis, but on just justice. There was injustice that occurred. It's very much like the CAA, right? And that whole controversy. Hindus, right? People are saying that that's a discriminatory law, but it is giving refuge to Hindus that are being persecuted in Muslim states, right? These Hindus that were left behind in Pakistan and Bangladesh, in Afghanistan, and what was once India, and with partition, the deal wasn't that you would become an Islamic state and persecute Hindus. So, they are, ancestrally India, and India is giving them shelter. Now, this is just the mere fact of democracy and justice. India should just at least stand up for that. It doesn't have to do it for ethnic reasons, but it's just like in as Vishnu Bisram mentioned,
as a friendly country, since
yes,
the Hindu group is majority. Yes,
in South Africa, Afro-Americans felt very strongly about it. There's nothing wrong with that. Afro-Caribbean people felt very strongly against apartheid. There's nothing wrong with that. It was unjust. So we could all come and support justice. So why are Indians afraid to support justice for Indians when it's just justice? When Indians were kicked out of Uganda in 1972, out of Kenya in the 1960s, when not only is the dal and chana and flour and all the essential foodstuffs and materials of cultural expression was not allowed. People were killed trying to, they call them ballot box martyrs. People were killed during that whole period. There was a massacre of Indians in an Indian village, rape of women, of village, which was then later named after the president of Guyana. That's how in your face the oppression was of that party. It was murder as well that was occurring. It was suppression, and you don't have to be pull out an ethnic card or anything. This is just normal human justice. And if the Indian government, which has stood up for justice around the world, but not in these cases, it's really something that it disappoints, is to put it mildly.
So we focused on how Indian government is reacting to it, but if you see, honestly, when you guys were talking, it's a pure human right issue.
That's right.
The atrocities that are happening in the ethnic group in Guyana is matter of human rights. And what about the international, intervention in this? No UN, no America, since it's a South American, and no neighboring other countries intervening in it. Considering it's a human right violation happening there.
Well, the U.S. has been far more vocal. The Canadian government a little less so, but at least they've made their thing. They have a lot of investment in the gold mines and so forth. The British government, the EU, they've been making statements, thank God, because before they supported the dictatorship from 1964. They supported the deposing of Chetty Jagan. But at least now they're saying something. They're threatening sanctions. I don't know what will eventually happen, but at least some voices are being raised in the diplomatic community, but it hasn't been made an issue that the people are passionate about. It'll be a statement, it'll be read as a press release, and people will see it in the newspaper, flip the page to the next story. The passion for the issue is not there.
There were observers in Guyana, international observers from the Commonwealth Group, from the Organization of American States, from the United Nations, from the Caribbean region that's called CARICOM. The U.S. ambassador took an active role, as did the ambassadors of United Kingdom, Canada, and the European representative. And all of them have come out on the side of democracy. They condemn the electoral fraud. And they have threatened sanctions. As a result of these actions, the government seemed to have been wielding some concession to allow a recount of the ballots. But what the people of Guyana are worried about is that the government may not accept the outcome if it shows that it is defeated. So therefore, we need the international community, we need India and the Commonwealth to galvanize its forces and to warn of serious consequences unless the government allows a real count of the ballots instead of some superficial counting to show itself has won the elections, when in fact the unofficial count had showed the opposition had won the elections by 53% to 46%, with 1% going to the smaller parties.
The government is willing to flout law, to flout the courts, to riot in the streets, to call out its supporters on the flimsiest of pretexts, to stay in power, and that there have been many calls since December 2018, when a motion of no confidence was called, for where the court would order them to do one thing, where the Constitution, and there would be some excuse, some process, some blatant disregard that they would just have, and they would take the good faith of the international community for granted, take advantage of it, and push, so that we are here now in 2020 and the change of government hasn't happened. So what I would say is, we've seen this before. They agree to a recount, and then they pull some technicality, some delay process. So the international community has to be on the ball, because these people will cheat at every single turn, every time you turn your eyes. And I'm saying it plainly now, because it is plain. The Commonwealth observers, the observers were there, who went there to be fair and objective, but they just saw the blatant fraud occurring in front of their eyes, that they could no longer give the benefit of a doubt that this is really an attempt to steal the election in front of the world. And what they are doing is they are gambling that the international community will be tired and lose interest, and that nobody will actually do anything anyways. And that's what they're gambling on. That is what they're gambling on.
I heard Dr. Vishnu, you mentioning, a lot of Guyanese have gone to many countries, and there is a strong diaspora, Indian diaspora in America. There is a strong Indian diaspora in Britain, and wherever Indians are. Then it's very strong. Recently, we saw the biggest, spectacle when Mr. Modi came to Houston, and we saw how strong the Indian diaspora is. And then there is definitely a talk of how Hindu connectivity. Being myself active here, I know that there is a Guyanese community here, and there is an Indian community here. They both are connected in the name of Hinduism. So, what has been done, or how much has been done to actually connect the non-political diasporas in all these big countries to help the political crisis, or the help the Guyanese or the Hindu ethnic group in Guyana?
There is a strong community spirit of the Indo-Caribbean diaspora here in the United States, especially in the New York, Florida area, some in Georgia, and as you mentioned before, in the Dallas area as well. Wherever Indo-Caribbeans settle, they always cluster around temples, around businesses,
Yes.
and other religious institutions. Regrettably, this election happened in the midst of this COVID crisis, and so we have not been able to gather in person to discuss it. But just before the shutdown here in New York, there were rallies among Indo-Guyanese and the Caribbean people to highlight attention and to put pressure on the government of Guyana to accept the will of the voters. So yes, there are activities going on. We have also had petitions signed online, and one of these was addressed directly to the Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo. And today, I myself wrote a release on it, and that I sent out to the media, the press in India and around the globe. And I'm hoping that it will be carried, and that the Indian government will also focus some attention on it.
Dr. Kirk, would you like to add something to it?
Yes, because I actually grew up in Toronto, where there's a large Indian community. There's a large Indo-Caribbean community, Indo-Trinidadian, Indo-Guyanese, and Indian of all types. Goans and
Yes.
Punjabis and Sindhis and all types. And
But all
it's very
fragmented,
interesting.
not together.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. It's interesting, the interaction.
Yes.
It's curious sometimes, very curious. Sometimes it would be the Indo-Caribbean people that would lead off in temple building, right? Now, the hugest temples and the richest ones end up being the ones from the rich Indian community. But in this sort of in-between struggling phases, when it's at somebody's house or they're raising money to try to start up a little mandi or somewhere, very often the Indo-Caribbean community had taken the lead. And maybe it's because of our history of building these things out of nothing in the Caribbean, and we took that up there. So that's one. Another thing about the fragmentation, which you rightly mentioned, there's many aspects of it. I think that Indo-Caribbean people have not taught their children enough about their history. They may not even know enough about their own history to pass it on to their children. I think that a lot of times when Indo-Caribbean people interact with Indians from India, they feel a sense of inferiority. Sometimes they feel that Indians look down on them as well, for not speaking an Indian language, for example, for being very westernized in many ways as well. And so you have these sort of barriers. And many times, especially I think the Guyanese population, I have an uncle who is Guyanese, and it's only, we heard little whispers sometimes about what happened in Guyana, but nobody really talked about it. And he had this real hatred in him, but he would suppress it because of the traumatic experiences he had. And I think a lot of times when people go abroad, they want to forget the past and forget the trauma that happened to them as well. And I think we have a lot of these different things interacting, so that perhaps the potential resource that exists there to mobilize has not been tapped fully enough. And I do think that it needs to be tapped more.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that, not just the identity of Caribbean Indians, Guyanese Indians, or, Indian Indians, but also that we have a bigger identity if we can tap onto that, like Hindu, collective Hindu, wherever we are.
Yeah.
I think that will be very beneficial for all the small countries where Hindu communities are suffering. I feel that is the one weakness we have, that we don't gather in the name of religion, and that has kind of, after so many years of hard work in Guyana, if we see an example, Guyana, where a Hindu ethnic group has actually built the Guyana the way we see it now, but you still can't claim it because we've not been able to, gathered as Hindus all around. I mean, not in just one country, not forget all around the world, not even in one country.
A very valid point.
So in the end, I would like to ask both of you, what would be your message? What is your suggestion, or according to you, could be the way that the democracy gets back to Guyana?
So I would very much like for the various organizations in the United States or North America to send a note, a message to the government of India to issue some kind of stern message to Guyana, or through the Commonwealth, and through whatever regional organization, international organizations that India belong, to send a very, very serious message of warning to the government of Guyana to respect democratic outcomes. Otherwise, it will face very, very serious consequences. I think that will have to go a long way. Every country has condemned the fraud in Guyana. Countries in Africa, in Europe, in North America, in the Caribbean, in the Americas. What is missing is the government of India. We would very much like to see the government of India take a very, very strong position.
Dr. Kirk, your message?
Pressure, your representatives, or sign the petition that is online for the U.S. to sanction, and the international community to put pressure on the Guyanese government. There are social media discussion groups and political groups, and some of your listeners may be involved in fighting for human rights. Include this issue, but include this issue, especially if people are doing this already. Don't forget about our Guyanese brothers and sisters, as unfortunately has happened for decades before. That's it's the reason why I reached out to Rajiv ji and this platform, the Infinity Foundation, because I want to make these connections. I want people to understand more. I want to spread the word, and I think that it is something that many of your listeners should be passionate about, and probably would be if they knew more. So if we spread that knowledge through social media, through signing petitions, through talking with the Guyanese people that we may know in our communities, and finding out more, I would encourage that as a step forward.
Absolutely. Well, wishing both of you a good luck. I hope that your hard work, or the way you're trying to, raise awareness towards what is happening in Guyana, works. And by the end of this crisis that world is facing right now, definitely, I think there's a dawn on the other side, and Guyana sees absolutely brand new dawn, and the dawn of free and fair election, and the right government taking the seat there. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. It was lovely talking to both of you. And as I said, wishing all of you good luck. And you have a wonderful day, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that was our interview today. I hope you enjoyed the interview. Please let us know and subscribe the channel. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here and also hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified. To donate, please click this button.